From the casual player to returning veteran, the ARPG genre has always been defined by the ultimate quest to get the gear necessary to empower your character, to experience the build or class fantasy, and ultimately get strong enough to conquer every challenge that may come your way. And the hallmark of this experience is that game's itemization system, the gear, weapons, and jewelry that you will equip to empower your character, your build strengths, different ways of scaling your damage and survivability, and for at least some people, making your character look as badass as possible. In Diablo 4, the difference between your starter character and their ragtag combination of normal items without any intrinsic powers to them, and your endgame level 100 Demon Slayer ultimately comes down to the gear that you put on them. But how powerful is gear in Diablo 4 really? And with the introduction of the crafting systems of tempering and masterworking, really what is the difference between a random set of gear and something hand-picked to be able to fully empower whatever build you want to play? Hi, I'm MacroBioBoi, and I wanted to take a journey with you, starting off with a character with a base set of gear, and very slowly adding in the different forms of power that you can apply to your character, whether it's tempering, masterworking, re-rolling for different stats on your gear at the enchanter, and then ultimately looking for very powerful and specific pieces of gear and just how transformative it is to add that to your character. Rather than doing some kind of heinous number crunching mathematic breakdown here, I just wanted to show you that experience of taking that character's progression and how much of an impact it makes, slowly learning the ropes, coming to understand the stats that are good for your character, incorporating these crafting systems, and ultimately working towards something that would approach a best in slot setup, and just how much it will impact your enjoyment and ability to play your class. So let's start off by creating a baseline here. We're going to take a level 100 character, assuming that you know how to put together a good skill tree, a decent Paragon board. Maybe you're following one of our build guides on maxroll.gg or whatever website that you prefer. And while you've skimmed over the recommended stats that you should have on every gear piece, sadly, you don't get to choose whether or not you have gear. What you're looking at here is a random assortment of item power 920. That means that's just shy of the strongest item power that we could possibly have. This is going to make it harder for the character to reach very specific survival caps, most notably armor and resistances. It's going to reduce the overall strength of the stats that we have, and furthermore, it's going to reduce the maximum damage that our weapon can do. Because of all of this, we may need to include certain aspects or make certain changes in our skill board to be able to account for hitting these armor caps, or being able to get better resource management so we're able to spam our spender skills more often. And generally, our ability to scale our damage is probably not going to meet the difficulty or the challenge of the content that we want to do. In Diablo 4, the pit is the ultimate endgame challenge that we currently face. With an ever scaling difficulty, as you go up in tiers, it will get harder and harder. But the rewards that you get and the materials that you get allow you to further empower your gear through masterworking. The gear that we have on here just shows a random collection of stats. While none of them are completely useless, because every stat has a purpose, a keen-eyed Bone Spear Necromancer player, or even somebody relatively new to the game might notice that we're losing out on pretty pivotal stats here. We haven't reached our attack speed or critical strike chance cap, drastically reducing our ability to output damage. While we have some survivability stats like maximum life and armor, we are missing key stats like resource management through essence per second. A lack of cooldown reduction as well as main stat further reduces our ability to be able to spam incredibly powerful ultimate skills. And while given enough time, this character, although competently built in missing gear, would be able to finish this level 61 pit, which is what you need to be able to first unlock the strongest crafting materials. We would never be able to finish it within the 15-minute timer, and while we would get some gear at the end of this, we wouldn't be able to progress further and we wouldn't unlock those materials. As you can see, we have to take every single fight very seriously, maximizing how often we're applying crowd controls. We're not able to move very quickly, and it is an excruciating ordeal to try to get through the entirety of this content. This experience here represents people who, again, maybe following a build guide, get the overarching concept of what they're supposed to be doing, but haven't really gained the intimate knowledge of what stats would fully empower them, or have not had the opportunity to find the gear with those stats on it. I think this is a really good starting point to give you an idea of what you should expect if you find yourself in this situation in Diablo 4. And the next thing that we want to do is just show how powerful the crafting system of tempering, where you can choose to select very specific stats that are more impactful for your build in particular. And with a little bit of luck in RNG, you'll find yourself with a decent increase in power that can be fairly transformative for your gear's ability to carry you through content. The tempering system in Diablo 4 is one of the first crafting systems truly added to the game. We're able to take a base piece of gear, typically an ancestral legendary piece of gear that you would have found in World Tier 4, and be able to add 2 thematic affixes or stats to that piece of gear. So a helmet, which can have defensive and utility aspects on it, can have defensive and utility tempers, adding on additional armor, perhaps thorns damage or maximum life, giving you added quality of life by extending the length of time that crowd controls are applied to targets, or even just increase the radius of your curses so that they hit more monsters at the same time. For offensive pieces of gear, including your gloves, your weapons, your rings, and your amulet, you can add on tons of additional additive damage, which in the early game is a huge boost to your overall output of power, as well as adding on attack speed, the ability for your skills to trigger twice, doubling how often your bone spear will hit a target, reducing the cost of your skills so you're able to spam them for longer, or increasing the rate that you generate resource to empower stats like essence per second and essence on kill to make it so you can perpetually refill your mana battery. Even something as simple as tempering on more mobility to your amulet and your boots will just make you that much faster running through the content, able to engage packs more quickly, as well as dodge dangerous monster attacks faster. Simply tempering your gear with decent to valuable stats can vastly increase the performance of your build, and what you're currently looking at is the exact same character, but instead with tempered affixes attached to each gear piece, and look at how much smoother the gameplay experience becomes. But not only have we nearly doubled our damage output, but the addition of more stats, like total armor, actually allow us to use completely different aspects on our gear, whereas previously we needed the example of the Juggernaut to be able to hit our armor cap, we no longer do. Adding on additional survivability aspects to make the gameplay even safer, or being able to swap that piece of gear over to a utility aspect, which will often carry along with it additional damage multipliers. Better resource management on our rings and our amulet means that we can use completely different skeleton mages here to be able to further increase our damage, as opposed to having to rely on them for essence management. Every small tweak or addition of a stat to your character doesn't just empower that piece of gear further, but allows you to fundamentally change your setup in your skill tree, your paragon board, the aspects that you choose to have on your gear, or even stats that you would normally need but can now swap out for better options on those same gear pieces that you're already wearing. Here's where you get a really good look at the typical progression through an ARPG, where a person has been playing a character or a build or a class for long enough where they've begun to understand and unravel the mysteries and the puzzles of that same character. And just like a lock needs a key, the gear that you wear and the decisions that you make and how you craft on it can unlock untold possibilities of what your build can do. Empowered by their gear, the Necromancer in our endgame progression example here is going to finally be able to masterwork, the second of the new crafting systems added in Season 4 of Diablo 4. But before they explore that avenue to power, that avenue of gear progression and itemization, we should probably take a look at some systems that have been in the game since it launched. And if you're somebody who had picked up the game when it was first released, you'd be keenly aware of these things. The first being that you're actually able to re-roll a stat on your piece of gear at the Occultist. This is known as Enchanting. You're able to select one of the 3 stats on your piece of gear that may not be the most beneficial for you, and instead re-roll it by spending resources with a chance to get lucky and get a key pivotal stat that you might need. Not only that, but the majority of your gear can have sockets added to them. This would allow you to put in gems of various types, either increasing your survivability by adding rubies for more maximum life, or able to put in your class specific gem. For the Necromancer, these would be topaz, adding on an incredible amount of intelligence, which helps to further scale the base damage that our skills do in the first place. So before we go and craft on the gear that you just saw, let's try to zhuzh it up a little bit, spruce things up, and get some key stats on them that we were missing and see just how much more powerful the build will become. While tempering gear will add that huge amount of power to a build, It is in enchanting and being able to socket them that you gain the extra leg up that you need to start taking the gear that you have and truly making it work for what your build needs it to do. The list of stat here on screen are the simple additions that we're able to make to the build by taking completely unnecessary or unwanted stats and re-rolling them into something more valuable. Gaining 20% critical strike chance better enables the build, which requires that each of your skills successfully critically strike for some of the key aspects and damage multipliers that you have. Adding on to that, 16% additional attack speed and nearly 100 additional critical strike damage further reward you for building into the crit system in the first place. While the addition of 5 topaz granting you a total of 500 intelligence is representative of nearly a 50% total increase in damage. The extra benefit of adding on critical strike chance even means that you get to use better gems than the ones you were using previously. For defensive stats, we're able to stack on an additional 1000 armor, 1600 maximum life, and over 15% movement speed. And while the previous setup was able to fully complete the pit, killing the boss at the end and getting the reward, a death here or a death there might eat up a lot of your timer, meaning that you won't get the crafting materials. But as you can see here, the build is performing significantly better. We're able to kill the final boss with nearly 4 additional minutes left on the timer. That's a pretty marked improvement. But all of the strength of our gear is about to receive a massive increase, because Masterworking is just on the horizon. While there's ultimately a lot of nuance to how the system of Masterworking actually functions in the game of Diablo 4, the bare brass tacks of it is fairly simple. You can masterwork a piece of gear up to 12 times, and every single time that you do it, it'll increase every single stat on the piece of gear. So all 3 of the normal affixes that come on it, as well as your 2 tempered stats. In total, you're going to increase every single stat on this piece of gear by 60%, which is already a sizable increase. But during this process, you can actually masterwork crit 3 times, and this crit can hit any one of the 5 affixes that you have on your piece of gear. If you're super lucky, you could hit the same stat 3 times, adding on 3 additional 25% increases to that single stat. While we've typically been talking about very generic stats, armor, maximum life, increased attack speed, and critical strike chance, as well as damage, what we haven't touched on are plus skill ranks. These can either increase the base damage of skills like Bone Spear themselves, as well as increase passive skills that tend to add on additional multipliers to your character's build. Being able to successfully masterwork crit on any one of these passive skills or main core skill ranks has an incredibly large impact in your build's ability to output damage. Looking at the gear currently on screen, it is effectively unrecognizable from where we started off. See the special indicator that one of the stats has been re-rolled through enchanting, check out the sockets and what types of gems are inside of them. Look at the massive increase to each one of the stats, as well as those 2 new temper stats on them as well. And then lastly, look for any blue indicators for a successful masterwork crit. The gear that you're currently looking at is only masterworked 4 out of 12 ranks. The power that you would get out of this system only goes up and up the more that you're willing to grind and spend resources on further masterworking. When all is said and done, here are humble Necromancer who started off just having hit level 100, finishing off their build, and putting together a ragtag group of random legendary pieces of gear and aspects that they happen to find along the way, is now a hyper-efficient machine, clearing this same pit level, gaining an additional 2 minutes over what we just saw previously, as opposed to the start of this journey where it wasn't even able to kill off the monster packs fast enough in the first level to be able to open up the boss room. But this character's journey does not stop here. I hope that I've been able to emphasize the fact that the gear in Diablo 4 and your ability to itemize with it, craft on it, and ultimately select the stats that you exactly need for your build is an amazing access point for incredible amounts of power that can take a character that's just barely struggling to get by and transform them into superstars. And that is so much more obvious when you realize that the gear that I've been showing you throughout this video is effectively garbage tier, trash bin, we have gear at home levels of incredibly poor value. Because it turns out, like in any ARPG, the more that you're willing to grind and hunt down stronger pieces of gear, the stronger you become. And I feel like this showing here truly exemplifies this concept. Take a look at the difference between just swapping out 2 of the pieces of gear that we're currently wearing with ones with significantly better stats on them. While the gloves that we had previously that you're seeing on the left had generically good stats, critical strike chance, maximum life, as well as intelligence, the gloves on the right exemplify what you would consider best in slot stats for a Bone Spear Necromancer. First and foremost, just having plus ranks to the skill itself. Increasing the base skill rank changes the starting number that then all of your damage multipliers scale off of. Add on incredibly valuable critical strike chance as well as increased attack speed means that we're outputting damage faster than we were before. We did the exact same thing here, tempered on 2 valuable stats for the build, masterworked it up to 4 times, and then put on the aspect that our build needed. Likewise, for the amulet, we see an additional itemization system that we hadn't touched on previously, and that's that little star symbol next to the ranks to avulsion. That's called a greater affix. A greater affix will take a stat that you have on a piece of gear and increase its base by 50%. And that's before we talk about any bonuses that you would get from Masterworking. In fact, every single stat on a piece of gear that you find could have a greater affix on it, increasing the total value of that item by a total of 50%. Triple greater affix gear with perfect tempers on it and triple masterwork crits on a particular stat that you want are effectively the holy grail of this game, something that very few people should ever expect to get, but what ultimately allows you to chase after gear near infinitely, hoping to maximize a character over the course of a season. When we're talking about just how powerful gear is in Diablo 4, how much stronger it makes your character, this is where we start to get into the point where maybe gear is overpowered. And while that item journey of the Bone Spear and Necromancer hopefully highlights the point of the video that I wanted to make here, this is obviously also ignoring the additional systems of both unique items, which add on additional incredibly powerful and specialized additional effects that will either transform how his skill works, or add on incredible amounts of damage multiplication, or serve the purposes like this amulet to shore up any of the issues that a build might have to be able to reach different caps that they need, and then the addition of the mythic unique items in the game, which are so legendary as to be the rarest pieces of gear that you can find, that unlock even more powerful, unique, and interesting ways of changing your build's performance and what it does. So let's go ahead and answer that question. Is gear overpowered in Diablo 4? I like to think that it is, and that's not a bad thing. An action RPG, a Schluter that we are currently playing, the slash and loot, dungeon delving, infinite grind, seasonal content of a Diablo game, or any of the Diablo likes across the genre, is meant to give the player something to perpetually put time into and inevitably get some type of reward out of. To that end, Diablo 4 has grown into a game where that actual chase for items has a meaningful bite to it, a heft, that keeps me and many of the other people in this community interested in continuing to grind out and seek out these perfect pieces of gear, just throwing RNG to the wind and hoping that our dice come up as nat 20s. I hope that you can enjoy this type of video. It's definitely something different than what I have normally done in the past. I'm definitely much more of a number crunching, mechanics test driven type of content creator in this space. But I will often get questions related to how people can make their build work better, why it's not working like it is advertised, or perhaps not quite understanding what they need to do to increase the power of their build, be able to do the type of content that they want, and ultimately it comes down to these types of in-depth systems. Quite literally, what stats do you have on your gear? Are they good for what you're using them for? Can they be better? Is there any way to manipulate your gear, craft on it, or transform it into a thing that would work better for you? Or do you just need to call it quits, go out, grind some more, and find a better piece of gear? While what you have right now might be fine for what you were doing at level 50, level 60, just walking into World Tier 4, the stats on your gear are so pivotal to what you're doing that a fully min-max build at the end of the season's journey will have so many unique and specialized hyper high rolled stats to be able to completely transform everything else that you might need on that particular build. Getting a masterwork crit on critical strike chance here might allow you to use a completely different aspect that unlocks a different avenue of power that will ultimately increase your overall damage or general efficiency on your build. Or maybe even the difference of 1 to 2% cooldown reduction can completely unlock a playstyle of your build that was not possible at that very slightly lower number. Optimization in this game tends to be something that is often seen as a given, or just generally what everybody assumes that it would be. But truly, the changing of one stat here to one stat here, being able to roll a different temper, using a different aspect, removing a single paragon point, can unlock levels of output on builds that you would never have dreamed of just walking in as a starter character with some simple trash gear on. I hope that you're able to enjoy the kind of story that we were able to experience here. Again, it's very different from what I would normally do, but I've wanted to make this video for a long time and I just didn't really have a great way of doing it. But being able to actually see the transformation from a base piece of gear up to a fully crafted piece of gear and then ultimately swapped out for something better even helped me to have a better appreciation of just how deep itemization goes and what I need to be thinking about when I'm building my own characters. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to the channel. It's going to get a lot nerdier from here, but hopefully I'm able to kind of weave in these style of videos as well. These kind of more philosophical and shallower dives just into the systems, how they all work together, and ultimately what it means for the person on the other side of the screen enjoying this game. Also leave a like on the video, it would mean the world to me, but as always, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helped you to better enjoy the Diablo experience that you want, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.